particular case based on how many participants, observers, and representatives of the media crowd into my courtroom. While not perfect, this barometer has proven itself to be quite accurate over thousands of cases. If it were accurate on this day, I knew that I had never before presided over a case quite like this one. Each case is unique as the people, situations, and law governing them vary greatly. The law, when adjudicated properly, lies somewhere between a science and an art. A judge must be scientific enough to know the pertinent, repetitive volumes of case law and how they impact every situation, while, on the other hand, be artful enough to get into the minds and spirits of those who formed and framed our laws, to discern their intent and their lofty ideals as they relate to the modern and current circumstance. I knew, just as everyone gathered knew, and everyone in the civilized world knew, that the time had arrived for the battle over the estate of Red Stevens. Even though we all recognized this, I stared at the paperwork arranged before me until the courtroom grew deathly silent. Then I pounded my gavel, nodded to my bailiff, and addressed the court reporter. The case before the court today is the estate directed by the last will and testament of Howard Red Stevens. The court reporter's fingers flew unerringly over the mysterious keys, just as they had done for many years in my courtroom. I paused reverently, gazing at the counsel and litigants on both sides of the aisle that bisected my marble, majestic courtroom. I knew, in theory, the day I first sat at this bench, and I now know from practical experience, that the primary roles of a sitting judge is that of appearing, conducting oneself, and acting judicial. When I was first appointed to the bench, I was among the youngest to have ever sat in this position. I remember commenting to my beloved wife, Marie, that my walk down the corridor each day was intimidating, as I had to pass beneath the portraits of all the solemn and wise judges who had gone before me. As a fresh-faced youth, at least in judicial terms, I felt inadequate to fill their shoes, much less their robes. In the ensuing 40-plus years when I have expressed my concerns about my inevitable aging and my own mortality, Marie has repeatedly admonished me, "You're not getting old, but you are getting very judicial." I am ever mindful of the fact that the pomp and circumstance surrounding the courtroom is not to elevate me, but is instead to show the respect and reverence for everything that this courtroom, as a symbol of our law, represents. I concern myself little with what people think of me as I live and move and have my being on the sidewalks and in the streets of our city, but seated here at the bench, attired in my judicial robes, I become a symbol of all that we hold dear. As such, I demand respect, not for Stan Davis, husband, friend, and neighbor, but instead for Judge Stanford A. Davis, symbol and arbiter of the law. What can I or anyone say about Red Stevens that hasn't already been said, written, or broadcast to every part of the civilized world? Red Stevens was one of those people who became a legend in his own time and a cultural icon after his death. Generally speaking, a judge would be called upon to recuse himself or vacate the bench, turning the case over to another judge if he had heard as much about the case and the people involved as I had. Fortunately, or unfortunately, there was no judge anywhere or person anywhere who had not heard about and formed an opinion about Red Stevens, the terms and conditions of his will, and the case to be presented before me. Red Stevens was a giant human being in person, reputation, and deed. His life had been lived so much in the spotlight that it was hard to separate myth and legend from reality. He had been so famous for so long that his life seemed to have bridged many generations or eras of history. Red Stevens, as both legend and history tells us, was born into obscurity and unbelievable poverty in the swamplands of Louisiana. As a very young man, he left home, headed for Texas, with nothing more than the clothes on his back, a head full of dogged determination, and an indomitable spirit full of dreams. Over the next half-century, Red Stevens forged an empire in cattle, oil, finance, and industry that rivaled anything the world had ever seen. Red Stevens did everything in a big way. He was a hard-driving, sometimes ruthless businessman. He was a generous and compassionate philanthropist. He was a valued friend to many and a feared enemy to some. He knew virtually every person of fame and fortune who lived during his time. In many ways, Red Stevens and a handful of people like him defined the 20th century and established much of what we know as the 21st century. His accomplishments were legendary, but in many ways he was endowed with the human frailties that plague us all. Red Stevens worked unbelievably hard to give his family everything he thought they wanted.